Welcome to the Capes and Tights podcast. I'm your host, Justin Soderberg. We're back for another episode with comic creators Chrissy Williams and Lauren Knight to talk about their comic book over at Image Comics, Golden Rage, where Battle Royale meets the Golden Girls. Check out this episode, but before you do, go to Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and make sure you follow us. All the links are available on capesandtights.com, as well as Spotify, Apple, and all your major podcasting platforms for these episodes here. So this is writer Chrissy Williams and artist Lauren Knight talking Golden Rage here on the Capes and Tights podcast on capesandtights.com. Enjoy, everybody. Welcome to the podcast, ladies. How are you?
Yes, good. Thank you. Happy to be here. Thank you very much.
Very good. Very cold, but very good.
It's funny because we emailed back and forth about setting this up and the time difference and things like that. I realized that the number of people I've talked to on the podcast that are from the East Coast are way higher from other time zones. So setting up a podcast interview recording across the seas like this was a first. I've talked to someone in Alaska and I'm in Maine, so that was a difference. And now having someone, you guys, over the seas is pretty crazy to have this time difference. So at least we got here and got on here.
Yeah. No, it's great.
So we want to talk some Golden Rage, but I really kind of wanted to get into comic books in general just at first. And either one of you can start. It doesn't really matter to me, but like, how did you get into the world of comics reading wise first? Like, how did you get into taking in comic books?
Lauren, do you want to?
No, I don't want to start. Ever.
Okay. I started very much as a kid reading Topolino, which is the Italian version of the Disney comic book thing. Yeah, because my mum's Italian and I was brought up in England, and they wanted me to get better at Italian, and they thought that I think basically that was the sort of routine, like, here, comics, more Italian language thing. And I definitely read a lot of like Asterisk. Did I just say Asterisk? Asterix and Tintin and all of those kinds of when I was growing up. And then I had a big kind of gap where I suddenly got into boys. That sounds weird, but you know what I mean. And then kind of came back to comics as an adult, where suddenly, my memory of it being all Snoopy or dogs with quiffs or whatever was not the case. And it's been such an immense joy as an adult to realize what stories comics are being told in comics now. But yeah, so that was that gap, and now an adult. Yeah.
Okay. For me, I have to admit I didn't really get into comics at all until I was, I would say, early 20s. But I don't have a comic shop where I live, so I never really had any access to them. I did have like the Beano and stuff like that growing up, but I never sought them out. So when I did get into comics, I started with American Vampire. So that's where I started. And ever since then, it's just been picking up things based on whatever takes my fancy, favorite artists and stuff like that. So yeah.
It's funny. I just love asking that question because everybody you talk to has like a different quote unquote origin story in the world of comic books. And there are many people who have stories just like both of you, which is, I feel like a lot of people have that gap. I don't know if it's the, heading into puberty and the changing and all that stuff where you change your I don't know, fandoms of things or your passions, or if it's just life gets a hold of things, or what you were reading starts to taper off a little bit and you didn't realize there was other outlets for this stuff. I talked to a couple people. Speaking of the person from Alaska I was talking to, he did the same thing, but it was just like, high school got busy and all that stuff, and it wasn't cool to read comic books in high school. So a lot of people take that gap. I took a gap, the same thing. I started as a kid, had a little bit of a gap, and then obviously really into it now. But yeah, and also the idea of there's a lot of broader range of comic books nowadays than there were a number of years ago, and that includes Golden Rage as a different book. The solicitation of it to get me to read it, I had to. I'm not convinced my comic book store owner, but he skipped over it, not on purpose, but just like one of those things where he just lost it. And when I told him that I wanted to place the order for it for FOC, he was very mad at himself for missing that on the order guide, and so he ended up ordering and getting it for me. But after he read your guys' solicitation on what Golden Rage is going to be, he was like, I need to get this book, and we were both happy that we got the book.
Oh, yay, that's awesome. Yeah, it's really weird what you're just saying about that not being cool.
Yes.
I mean, well, we could come back to that in the context of Golden Rage in a minute, but that's definitely was like a factor. I remember I played loads of video games as well, like on, well, the computers that there were when I was a young child. But that again, I didn't know anyone else who was sort of playing them. Comics, didn't know anyone else who was reading them, and it just sort of it just gradually sort of dwindled away because I didn't really have anyone else to talk to. And in like absolutely pre-internet, like there was no, if there was no one in your town doing it, there was no one in your town doing it, and that was the end of it. So it's it's really interesting, isn't it? Yeah, I just wanted to add the cross, and because video games, I used to work on video games magazines as an adult, so I also had that gap with video games where I then came back into games having played like Chucky Egg or weird like Frogger things and other text adventures and other stuff, and then coming back, and it's so interesting coming into an art form as an adult. Like one of the first things that I read coming back in was Understanding Comics, and I think that has like shaped the way that I re-entered the art form, thinking about it so much more from a formal perspective than obviously I had done as a tiny child.
Yeah. It's funny how you mentioned that video games too, though, because video games have become this more culturally accepted thing that I have coworkers at my day job who just talk about, hey, let's go online and play video games, and no one questions them. But when I brought up that I have a trade paperback or a graphic novel club at my local comic book shop that I go to once a month, we read a book, and we have like a book club based on graphic novels. And when I told them I was going to book club, I'm like, oh, what'd you read? And the first book we read was Witches. And they were like, oh, a comic book club. And all they could picture of me is probably me playing with little action figures and reading Superman comic books. And I said, well, Witches is definitely not that, because it was a very dark and disturbing comic book. But the idea that still, when I mentioned to coworkers that I'm into comic books, they still kind of like, yeah, that's weird. But if someone were to bring up video games nowadays, no one has a question in the world about someone playing video games. It's not a obscure and weird thing for someone to be doing.
Yeah. I wonder how the kind of behemoth of the sort of superhero movie industry, how that's going to affect what, the generations growing up now, how they think about comics. And I mean, well, there's a whole area of questions in that, but I wonder what's that's going to do to the perceived legitimacy of the comic book.
Yeah, but stories like Golden Rage help that broaden the my wife isn't into superhero comic books. I mean, she'll watch like the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies in the theater with me because I like a passion for that and stuff. And more recently she's like, oh, what's that book you're reading, or what's that book you're reading? Because first of all, Lauren, cover arts and artwork is obviously sells a book very well on the front of the cover. And so she sees that and she's interested in it. I explain it to her. It's a, either post-apocalyptic or horror or whatever. And she's like, wait, what? There's no superheroes in it? And I'm like, no, this is like one of my favorite books to read in the world are books that have mostly based in the real world with one or two obscure things that make it so it's unrealistic in real life. So like, Walking Dead, it's based in the real world, but then there's zombies. And so that kind of thing where it's like for a little bit you can read the book and go, oh, this could really happen. And then all of a sudden someone gets their neck eaten by a zombie. You're like, okay, that doesn't actually exist in real world. And she's really into that nowadays too. So that Golden Rage fits right into that category of it could be real with one small little thing that makes it so that, okay, it's still a comic book.
Yeah. Oh, I'm glad she's getting into it. When we've done a couple of signings and definitely had people coming up saying, oh, I've never been in a comic book shop before. Like I saw this online, or I saw this and it really spoke to me, like grandmas, and the comic about menopause, what? And just, or a comic that even uses the word menopause, but it's definitely it's reaching out to different people as well, which is really nice.
I had a lot of mums coming in, like, dragging their kids into the shops to get the book and get it signed.
Speaking of Golden Rage and this stuff, is how did this team? So you have the creative team is all female, right? I mean, the entire you're pretty much. I mean, like you're obviously you writer, artist, color, letter, editor, or women led team. How did this team of people get together?
Lauren, we connected just over Twitter. I saw Lauren posting her, I think I can't remember the exact bits. It must have been some of the bits from Buffy, I'm guessing, maybe, but it was some bits from your portfolio, like exactly at the time that I was on the lookout to see if I could persuade someone to come on a grandma romp, murder romp. And I messaged her and she was into the idea, and from my point of view, that was as smooth and as it was. It went, I was trying to think if there's anything else to add to that bit. No, then Sophie had the colorist. I'd already been working with on Insider Arts, which that Shelley Bond did that Kickstarter to raise money for retailers at the start of the pandemic. And talked to Lauren about Sophie, and we brought her in. Sophie brought Shane in. Becca is also someone that was worked on Insider Art. That we had a mutual, I think she was actually recommended by another friend in comics at one point, and we just perfectly hooked up. And I feel so glad that we got Becca, because now I feel like she's working on everything, and it's really good to have got her. And again, Jomette, because previously I've edited comics, but we wanted someone else to edit the comic, and so I was just asking around for recommendations of editors that people had worked with, and Jomette's name came up, and again we just got in touch. And I think there's something really fun about the Battle Royale Golden Girls elevator pitch that means people kind of go, really, initially, like it's a nice, it's people sort of lent in to the messages. So yeah, the team just kind of came together. I feel like there should be a much better origin story that involves like knitting needles and like a Battenberg cake or something. But
it's great though, because it shows, you mentioned earlier about not having the internet for things as a young kid to do these, like to look at things online, or Lauren, you mentioned about not having a comic book store in your town. With the internet, the invention of the internet has allowed you either read digitally or order online in these more rural areas that don't have comic book shops. But also the internet and social media allows creators to connect with each other that maybe you never would have been able to connect with due to Twitter. You were able to now have a partnership in this and make a book like Golden Rage, whereas maybe you would never have had that opportunity if it wasn't for the internet.
Yeah,
definitely. I mean, I hate Twitter, but I owe all of the work I've ever gotten through comics to Twitter. So
Twitter is one of those ones where no one likes it, but we all feel like we have to have it. So but I think this cover also, the first cover of Golden Rage #1, also sold me on you mentioned the elevator pitch, and then seeing a cover like that, and you're talking Golden Girls and you're seeing blood dripping from hands, you're like, I got to read this. And then a big benefit to me is the 5 issues. Like knowing it's a mini series to me is huge, because if you give me an ongoing comic book and you give me issue #1 and I like it, but am I going to commit to the entire series or not? You have to really draw me in. But even if I did like Golden Rage #1, but even if I didn't like it, I can commit to 5 issues because I can say, okay, you know what? Usually a season premiere of a TV show can be okay, but maybe a couple episodes in is really when it catches its stride. And so a 5-issue series makes me go, yep, or a mini series, 5, 6, 7, whatever it may be, allows me to go, I can commit to that many issues. I can definitely commit to that many issues. Let's do it and go for it. But luckily I read issue 1 and I wanted issue 2 right away. So there was no problem with that.
Hooray!
Yes, exactly. It works, right? You hook people in. No, it's that. And like I said, to me nowadays, with the wide range of comic books that are out there, being different is huge in my opinion. And some people can be almost too different, like go too far off the bridge. But this is definitely just enough off to pull you in and get you hooked into something that's a little different in the world of comics for sure. Golden Rage.
And definitely one of the concerns we had was that like the elevator pitch conjures different things for different people, right? Golden Girls is such a broad world, and the bits that people like best about Battle Royale are very different. Yeah. And when you put the two together, it doesn't paint the same picture in everyone's heads, you know. And I think we were, I don't want to speak for Lauren. I think I was, you know, worried that maybe it would be too different to people's expectations from that one line. But I guess the point of that line is that it kind of hooks you in, and then what you get, the actual story and the characters and the narrative that you have, which hopefully is the thing that actually sells you. It's like, come into our murderous old lady pub, but stay for the, you know, thoughtful funerals and the bit with the clowns, or something. Yeah, hopefully.
But you also did start the comic book out with they're sitting in a living room somewhere having tea. But obviously they have tea, but I'm saying like they're not just in this like nice, pristine, you know, Golden Girls style living room, and then all of a sudden, you know, shit hits the fan, and they're in this. You start in this world of craziness, so it's not like, it's not like this broad change from. It's not the Golden Girls in this story. It's the comparison that works well. But you guys executed it pretty well in that sense that you didn't do this broad switch from really nice joking around kind of in the living room to people murdering each other. It starts off that way.
Yeah, there's something there's something so brutal about the idea of just imagining like someone coming in and trying to garrote Betty White. You know, like it's too much. Like the tone we're going for has a humor to it, and like in Lauren's art you can see the point of view of the humor in so many places. The way that you composed stuff just to sort of like land where the funny bit is, or is I think is really well done, because tonally it's still about characters and the relationships and the community. It's not actually just about the brutality of even though someone does get stabbed like with a knitting needle, I think on page 2, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And strangled with a pair of tights as well.
Yes.
Yeah. It's like that's there, but that's not the about. That's like the context within which the story we're telling is happening.
I'm guessing, Lauren, it wasn't on your list of checklist of things to do in your lifetime is to draw someone stabbing someone else with a knitting needle.
No, but as soon as I was given the opportunity, I jumped at it. I was like, absolutely.
You gotta do that.
I'm going to knock out some dentures as well.
Yes. How do you guys work? I mean, I had a car accident a number of years ago, so I have dentures right now too. So I fit right in with the people. How did you guys work together? Like, do you, Chrissy, do you write the story? And I know most comic book artists and writers go back and forth on things, but is there times there's some imagery on that was 100% you, Lauren, and some of it was direction from Chrissy? How did you guys work together on that?
Do you want to take this, Lauren? I feel like I'm talking loads.
Well, I like that because I don't like talking. I think, well, Chrissy would just write the scripts. She wouldn't just write the scripts, but she would write the scripts, and then we would look over them. And I don't know, she didn't have too much, like, some writers can over direct in their descriptions and such, but there was none of that really with Chrissy. It was sort of like left to my interpretation. Which is better for me, because if I get too detail oriented, bogged down by that, I'll be stuck on that forever and not be able to picture a different way of showing a shot. So no, it was fine. It was good.
I had a question actually before I forget. Who designed the logo? Does
That
anybody
was
know?
Becca.
Becca. Okay, let her. Yeah. It took me a second. I'm a graphic designer by trade, so like I love seeing the designs. Like I see that more.
Yeah.
I just read We Ride Titans from Bolt Comic Books, and it was the trade paperback and the chapter artwork and the design of each chapter, where obviously it breaks up in the issues, was excellent. And I said something you don't get in a sometimes in a floppy comic book is because they don't have chapters; they have obviously covers.
Yeah.
But I saw it. It took me honestly until this week that I realized that it's Golden Age in a different font, and the R is in more of a scratchy font. And it was funny. I'm like, I should have noticed that from the beginning, but it took me a second to actually see that, and I love it. So, good job, Becca.
Yeah. It was that I think the logo was explicitly about like trying to get the feel of the Golden Girls, but doing something else more disruptive with it. But I think that idea that came, like, Becca showed us a few, but that is all Becca, and it's brilliant. Like, so much of the stuff on this project feels like it just came together quite easily. Like, we've had some things that we've gone back and forth over more, but I really feel like the majority of it has just gone really
suspiciously well.
Yeah. Everyone's got along really well. Like, there's just felt like a really nice sort of team vibe, and I don't know, it's been really cool. Everyone's brought their own sort of enthusiastic angles to it, which has been really nice.
Which makes it you happy to actually do a project with someone when you can actually get along and everything falls into place.
Yeah.
And I've over the past, I don't know, year or so, 2 years, I've come to respect letterers a lot more. Like it seems like one of those positions in the comic book world that the fringe comic book readers might just be like, oh, they just put words in a bubble. But I listen to a number of podcasts. They interview letterers on the podcast, and the work that goes into it, and the choice of where, like they said, the logo, or where there's some booms and things like that, just really has spoken to me recently. So that was another thing I said once I looked up and looked at the cover and say who was the letterist. I was very happy with the way that this book turned out that way. And then again, like you mentioned, the logo, I was very happy with that, because the reason I pointed out the logo too is I have this, my comic book store owner in my local comic book store could tell you if he was on here. I tend to vent about some people's logos on their comic books because you have some books that have such outrageously awesome artwork on the cover, and you open the book up and the book's beautiful, and the story's great, and then you look at the cover and it looks like some 14-year-old made it in high school, and it just really bothers me. I'm not going to call anybody out on that. No one's going to be knowing which books I'm talking about. But yeah, it's something about, as a designer, like I said, seeing that on a book, it makes me really excited, because it makes the whole page, the whole cover look beautiful.
Oh yeah.
For sure.
The thing you said about letters, I know it's a cliche of like the letter's work is essentially invisible, but like it's so true. Like all you have to do is see a page of bad lettering to know how bad like it can go wrong. And they, like, Becca just makes it look so effortless. And there's so many things that come back that I've forgotten which issue that she's where she's just really attentive to the actual page and the composition and the actual art. Where actually are we? Threading balloon tails, behind, around that. Like, she's really meticulous, and yeah, it just looks effortless, which is the kind of magic of the letterer, isn't it? Yeah.
So we've gone in this, and I forgot I wanted to talk about this at the beginning of talking about Golden Rage, but how did the story come about? Like, how did you get this in your minds to make this comic book?
So this would be my crazy brainworm. No, it's earworms, isn't it? Not brainworm. Okay, fine. It was after watching Mad Max Fury Road and spending time in the middle of the film where they go out to that group of old women who are just badasses living in the desert. I just wanted to go to them, I wanted more time with them. I thought it was amazing to see not just like, oh, a capable old woman, but like a whole like community of them en masse, which we never really get to see. Not really. And I was surprised at just how emotional I felt watching it on screen, but it wasn't something that I was expecting to react to, which is, and then it's like even sadder to have had such a big hit of emotion off that. But yeah, so that's really what sparked it, is just wanting to think about writing something that was a community of older women, and immediately trying to think of ways to make it dramatic, but make it funny, make it interesting. Just how would you play around with that? And I've always loved Battle Royale since it came out, and that seemed like the natural kind of comparison point. So that's where those things came together. And I mean, as soon as you talk about older women and something slightly lighter, Golden Girls is just there. It's unavoidable. This idea of the protagonists, as their own like unit or proto family unit, as we have in modern sitcoms, like that's kind of all. You start there, and it just felt like it kind of just it just organically took shape from that without too much fretting, I think. Yeah.
And obviously, when you heard this pitch of what the comic book was, Lauren, you jumped right on it, right? You were like, immediately, I want to do this project.
I mean, it's not every day you get asked to draw old ladies fighting. Like,
exactly. Yes, absolutely. And obviously the majority of the characters, you drew a bunch of women in the comic book. Was it one of those things where you had to like, how do I make them all look different? Or did you guys have notes for that? Like, because there's so many different people that you have to draw in here. And was there anything specific you wanted to get into some of these characters?
I don't know if you had specific notes, Chrissy. You kind of would have some suggestions and references and that. I knew that Rosie was supposed to be the tank, so I had to give her more physicality than the others. Lottie just gave me weird art teacher vibes, so that's what I went with with her. Caroline was the intellectual, so I don't know, they all just came together quite organically, like the script did, I guess.
No, that's awesome to hear. I just think it's like I'm an artist, but I'm more of a I could probably do cover art because it's one thing. Sequential art is probably never in my wheelhouse ever. Just drawing the same thing over and over again doesn't seem like very happy for me. I want to get a project done and then move on to the next thing, not continuously doing it. But I hats off to people who are like you who can do that, which is it's amazing. As an artist and as a writer, is comic book something you guys want to continue doing, or is this something that like you want to get into something else? I know obviously, Chris, you have poetry and other things that you're doing, editing comic books, but is there another comic book you would like to do at some point in the future?
From my point of view, I definitely would love to keep doing more comics. Yeah. This has been such a positive experience, and my brain's just kind of on fire with other ideas for stories and things now. So yeah, definitely. Lauren,
I would just keep doing that.
Exactly. It's a fun industry, and it's one of those things that, like I said, there's so much stuff going on. There's so many things that you could literally pitch a lot of things to a lot of people, and people are gonna be like, yeah, someone hasn't done that yet. You should definitely do that. And was Image Comics always the way to go with? Was that the beginning, always to go with Image?
We approached Image first, and they said yes, and we said yeah.
You said, wait, what? Really?
Wait, hold on a second. Are you sure about that?
It was
backsies.
It's so funny, isn't it? Because we worked on the sample pages, and like I wrote the first script in full, and it felt like we worked on it for ages, and then like we emailed it in, and I think didn't they reply like the next day? I feel like it was super fast, and it was just like holy shit.
Now we have to do this.
Now we have to make this thing.
It's always the fun part when you hear like someone wants it. You're like, oh, now we have to meet deadlines, and then we have to actually do this thing.
What if we can't do it?
Yeah. But no, we did.
Yes,
I can't believe
it's done.
Issue 5 is almost out now.
Just in December, beginning of December will be out. Is that what I read online? It's the funny thing about I've realized in the comic book industry is that you say relative idea of when it's going to be out, and then it comes out when it comes out. But I think it says December 7th online, if I was correct about that, is issue 5. Issues 1 through 4 hopefully are not available at comic book shops because they've been all sold out. But if they are available at your local comic book shop, grab them. And I'm guessing, I'm guessing that this will one point be in a trade paperback. Is that the goal?
Yeah, it should be. It's slated for the end of February at the moment. Fingers crossed. Yeah.
So maybe we'll read it in my book club. There you go. Right.
Yeah.
I always like reading books in book club that I've already read, because then then I can read it again and get more things out of it. Yeah, exactly. Speaking of reading, are you guys reading anything in particular right now that you want to say anything about?
Yeah. I've been reading, to mention Shelley again, I've been reading Shelley's Filth and Grammar Editor's Handbook, which is like, it's mostly tips about editing, but there's also some fun comics of sort of like her experience as well. And there's some really interesting stuff in there about from the editor's perspective on comics, which I just, I'm finding really interesting to read. Highly recommend.
I am not reading anything at the moment.
You're too busy.
Too much. Yeah, I spend more time drawing comics than reading them. I do have a pile of stuff I have to get to, but
it's funny, reading comics isn't going to make you any money. Right? Drawing them is going to make
exactly. If I'm not drawing, I'm not earning.
Yes, you'll read the comic books that you're drawing. There you go. That's the one you do. one comic book at a time, one page at a time. But yeah, I mean, Golden Rage was one of those ones that I just, like I said, I had to pick up because I felt like there's something to be said about the solicitation too, something about that Golden Girls Battle Royale thing that just draws you in and maybe you really want it. And this is one of those things that I usually have to listen to my local comic book shop to say, you need to read this. And this one I had to tell my local comic shop because he just, like I said, it was his mistake. He just missed it, that I wanted it. So always my recommendation to anybody who listens to this is, if you want something that's out there and you've heard about it, tell your local comic book shop that you want it, because there's a possibility that comic book shop should have missed it or whatever may have happened, and make sure they get it. So like if there's a comic book coming out in the future, make sure you tell someone you want it because they can get it for you and bring it in. And also if they did get it and you didn't know about it and they promote it to you, maybe you should listen to them. Because you might get Golden Rage, which would be very well worth it. So everybody should read Golden Rage for sure. December 7th, 5th issue comes out. And is there anything, you mentioned comic book, is there anything that you can say that you're working on now? Or is it, I don't ever put pressure on anybody to put anything out there that they're not supposed to talk about, but is there anything you guys are talking about now or working on now?
Personally, can't say anything right now. But, yeah, watch this space.
I'm just kind of working on making it through the day at the moment, so that's about it.
That's fine. Absolutely. No. Yeah, I had fun. This is like I said, this is how easy it is on this podcast. It's just talking about your guys' project and how awesome it was. I tend to reach out to some people. Some people reach out to me, and I definitely wanted to reach out to you and talk to you about this book because it was well worth it. And I'm excited to read issue 5 in December and maybe read the whole thing again. I've tended with these miniseries like this too. I've always read issue 1, and then when issue 2 comes out, read it again, and then issue 2, and then 1, 2. So by the time you get to the 5th issue, I've read 1 through 4 a number of times. So I'm excited to read it again, and I read it over the weekend because I was talking to you guys. So it's very well worth it. Not to guys, keep praising you on this book. It's a very good book, and I'm glad you guys were able to come on here and chat with me about Golden Rage. And then you both on Instagram and Twitter, you mentioned.
Yes.
Yeah. Mine is just my name, Chrissy Williams. Lots of photographs of cats on Instagram.
My Instagram is lalala.labia, and my Twitter is OG_lalala Lauren. Yes.
See, Chrissy got lucky and got the actual name, and then you had to go with
I didn't get lucky. I don't get lucky. I'm very lucky in being unlucky.
Well, you got lucky with the Golden Rage. It went so smoothly and everything's great. People love it. So, but thank you. And I'm sorry about the mix up on the time, but it is what it is. And I'm glad. So keep up the good work. I'll be following you too on all the stuff you do. And I follow you on Instagram. So obviously we'll see things in the future. And maybe one of these days you guys will come back on and chat about what your next projects are here on Capes and Tights podcast. But until next time, I really appreciate you guys coming on and spending some time with me.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks for
so
having
much.
us.
Yeah. Thank you for being so enthusiastic.